Hello and welcome to the Practice Odyssey. I'm Jen.
And I'm Alex.
And we're diving into our new season, which has been called, which we have, loosely named, Prequels and Sequels. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited. This season we're just going to be looking at books by authors which we've already attempted. And except we're going to be looking at the books that they've written either just before or after. So to kick us off, where a couple of seasons ago we did the Paul Edmund Davies
28-day warm-up book for all flutists, ... eventually.
Excellent. So today we're going to be looking at the second of his books he's written, which is A Consequence of Sequences. I really love that name, actually.
I know, I do too. It just rolls trippingly off the tongue.
I know. And sequences often do have terrible consequences because, I don't know if you find this, Alex, but when you're playing, do you find that, like, if the sequences go on for too long and they keep repeating, it's like your brain suddenly, it's like a tongue twister?
Oh, yes.
It's a finger twister, and it just goes off the rails so quickly. Anyway, so I loved it. I was like, yes, so true.
Yeah.
I was just...
Yeah, they are definitely like the tongue twisters for the musicians. They are musician tongue twisters, musical tongue twisters. So,
musical tongue twisters? Yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah, that sounds awesome. But anyway, you've looked a bit into the background of Paul Edmund Davies and...
Oh, yeah, you know I have. Okay, so let's kick it off. In case you haven't listened to our 28-day warm-up book for all flutists, ... eventually, episode, please go back into our archives and have a listen. The bio might be quite similar to what you are about to hear. But for those of you new listeners who have not heard it, so the book is by Paul Edmund Davies, and Paul was principal flute of the London Symphony Orchestra for 20 years. Lots of experience. For 5 years, he held the same position in the Philharmonia Orchestra and completed his orchestral life with 2.5 years at the English National Opera. In addition, he has written a flute technique book, the aforementioned 28-day warm-up book, edited flute music for Kevin Mayhew Limited, made many CDs, and now regularly gives classes and recitals in Japan, USA, China, Canada, Europe, and the UAE. In the summer of 2014, as a flute soloist, he directed a choir and orchestra to an audience of over 40,000 in South Korea. 40,000 people.
40,000?
And that's Rolling Stone size of, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe larger. I would have to check. He has also played on numerous film soundtracks, among them Star Wars, Harry Potter, Aliens, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and more recently, Maleficent, Big Eyes, Into the Woods, Thor: The Dark World, and Interstellar. So if you've heard those beautiful flute lines on the Interstellar soundtrack, that is Mr. Davies. But yeah, so that's a bit about Paul. So this book that we're doing, A Consequence of Sequences, includes 4 different sections. So we've got the first section, which is breathing and phrasing. Got your second section, which is fingers. The third section, articulations. And section 4, which is intervals. And each section has a lovely introduction along with 3 exercises, all written by Paul. And each exercise presents a pattern or a melody, which is then cycled through in all major and minor keys, which is also lovely. And he makes a point in his first introduction that these sequences, he has not provided a practice chart in this book, unlike what he has done for past books, like the 28-day warm-up, and that we should use these as kind of little mini musical statements to help enhance our practice regime as it is. So yeah, that's a little bit about this book. It's a nice warm-up book, help you get your flute practice started for the day. So that's what it is. That's what we've done for the past 2 weeks for y'all.
Yep.
And we've done just the book, plus whatever else they say in there. And now we'll report to you, listeners, how if we are now super sequence players, Yeah. Anyways, so that's what we're gonna do. And on that note,
nice.
Jen, how is your week 1 of playing through A Consequence of Sequences?
Yes. Okay, so I, as per usual, didn't really plan anything. I just dove straight in. I mean, I read the foreword and I found that helpful because it immediately pointed. I really found very helpful the thought that in the foreword he talks about scales and arpeggios and pure technical work, and then following that there are etudes or studies. But there's actually there's this kind of gap between playing pure scales and playing etudes, and sometimes the connection between the two cannot be super clear about what we're practicing and why we're practicing. So he's kind of created this book to kind of be that bridge between the two. So that kind of prepared me for what these exercises were going to be like, although I was still kind of surprised at how different this book was to his 28 days practice, because that's it is like different. The 28 days definitely has this feeling of it's like exercises, and you're practicing your scales, you're practicing your arpeggios. So, but then there are similarities, like his breathing and phrasing. Like in the previous book, he's picked these really nice tunes and put dynamics and phrasing in them, so it's not just like long notes or long tones, which can be good, and sometimes I feel like doing them, but sometimes they can be a bit dry. So it's nice having a tune to play where you can still kind of practice the same things and warm up that way. So I like that. What I found interesting was the expected phrase lengths in this book are way longer than the ones in the 28 days. To get like with all
they really are.
They're huge. Like you really need good breath control. So I found it really, really great. I love the breathing and phrasing exercises. And when you're doing all of them in every single major and minor key, so what this is like 24 times you're playing the tune transposed. This is like a boot camp for breathing. On that note, it took a really long time to get through. I was sitting there like after, like, because if you chuck on the metronome at, what does he say, 56 crotchet, you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, 20 minutes later I'm still going. And that's even most of the time I'm cheating and not even doing the repeats. And, it's, oh my gosh. My practice in the first week was quite lengthy because I picked I did one of each section every day and played the whole way through. And I think it took me like a good hour and a half to get through this. It was not a warm-up anymore. It was a full practice session. So that's kind of where I was sitting there going, oh, okay, I see what he means by it kind of being a bridge between scales and etudes. Like they feel a bit more almost like studies almost then. Yeah, it was good, except yes, I think the way I tackled it was maybe not how it was supposed to be approached. But yes, that was my first week. So yeah, I loved the breathing exercise. That was a super boot camp. The fingers, I loved how it was all the scales and thirds. I felt like I got a real nice workout. And because there's only like 3 exercises in each section, it meant like I repeated it twice throughout the week. So that was my first week, was kind of, I just basically busted through the whole book. Discovered
amazing.
That it takes a really long time if you do one of each a day.
Yeah, and that's amazing you were able to do that too, because like you're settling back into life in Australia right now, just freshly moved back from Cambodia.
That's true.
I mean, plus everything else. Wow. Major
I think
props,
I was enjoying actually having a bit of space to practice a little bit more substantially, which hasn't been happening for the past couple of months just because of the moves and the quarantines and everything.
Yeah, and quarantine, being in a hotel where you can only have a balcony. Oh my gosh. Listeners, listen to our last episode if you want the full story. Oh my gosh.
Yes, there's been a lot of quarantines and lockdowns. I've just been enjoying that. I think so. That's perhaps why I went a bit mad in my first week. So yes, that was my week one. How was yours, Alex?
Oh, thanks for asking. It's too funny. I feel like we swapped roles. Like, I feel like normally I would be the one that kind of goes crazy and, like, sticks to the book. It's like, I'm going to go through the whole thing and then dies. And I really... so for my week one, like, I was... so full disclosure, I have played through this before. I bought it, I think, when it first came out in 2018, 2017.
Nice.
Check back. But... because I was so excited because I loved his 28-day ones. And I was like, oh, yes, so excited. Can play some more sequences. And I did not read his first few pages. And I made myself a little practice chart. And I went like nuts. But since we're doing it for the podcast, I was in charge of the note-taking this time. I was a little more fastidious in my intro reading. And that's when I came across the bit where he says, intentionally, I have not provided a practice chart. And I was just like... well, crud. Oh, no. This is what I do. I live for the practice charts. I live for, like, checking things off and, you know, being like, oh, I did that and I did that. Look how productive I've been. So I noticed that. And he says, like, you know, later on in his intro, there's a few intros. This is the one at the beginning of the book, that he suggests that we build our own daily routine depending on our mood and the time available in which to practice. So, and he mentioned that some of the exercises take longer than others, and, you know, to, like, you know, and to really, another thing he says is also to really observe the dynamics. So since at this moment in our life, because we also, listeners, tell you what's going on in our lives, because it does affect how we approach these books. So just as Jen's moving in, I am moving out of my apartment here in Germany, and it's been a little crazy, and I haven't had as much time as I would like to practice. Also, we've mentioned in the past where I currently live, there's a bit of an issue practicing for long periods of time. So taking all of that into consideration, I was like, okay, I'm just going to use these exercises, you know, as kind of like little musical postcards, I think, as he says, to help enhance what I'm working on. And just add it to kind of my daily routine, which right now is just, usually I do a bit of like the De la Sonorité from Marcel Moïse as like a warm-up, and then I usually do some form of scales, Reichert, if I'm feeling not lazy, but if like I need motivation, you know, because like they're lyrical, they're fun to cycle through. If I'm feeling more adventurous or a little more, you know, to the point, I do some Tafanel Gobert, number 4, number 6, or whichever ones, and then move on to something. The works that I was currently working on, the orchestral works I was working on this week included Scheherazade by Rimsky-Korsakov. Go have a listen to that. Beautiful, rich flutes. Flute pieces are like excerpts in there. And I was also doing some of the Rabboni etudes, which are also edited by Paul, which may have been chosen deliberately because they were also from Paul. So I decided, okay, so how? Because then it was like, okay, how do I do structure with these, but without structure, right? And so I decided that I would focus purely on the dynamics. That was kind of one thing I was like, okay, you know, if I have to choose one thing that's going to be in focus, I'm going to go with the dynamics for now, because he mentions that as well. So the first week, especially with reading and phrasing, like you said, Jen, I noted, these are some long phrases at the suggested tempo. So I took a little liberty with that. I tried my best to stick to them, and I could do that, you know, a good chunk of the time, but the focus was always on how is the phrasing and really paying attention to his dynamic markings throughout it. And I have to say, they're quite interesting. Often, you know, like for the majors, he puts a big emphasis on playing a little louder. Like it's usually marked around mezzo forte, mezzo piano, whereas the minor ones are usually often more mezzo piano, piano. which I thought was interesting, kind of helping the brain get used to this idea we're happy, like major is happy and like da-da-da, and the minor keys are a little more mellow and a little more mysterious with these piano sounds. So I never really noticed that before or put much thought into it, but since I was intentionally focusing on that, I noticed that this time, and I was like, oh, that is cool. And that also, cool. Since I was only doing the postcards, I did note that I would only do usually each day like up to, like I would either just do the sharps or the flats. So for our non-musical listeners, instead of doing all 12 scales and their minors, which would come to a total of 24 sequences for each exercise that you have to cycle through and repeat, can add up quite quickly. I only did half of that, so I only do the 6 of them plus their minors, which would be 12, because I just like I felt like that would be my postcard, and since they were supposed to be a little shorter and just where I needed them, usually I would choose the ones that were in the keys of the Scheherazade one. So I think the really nice Scheherazade melody, the solo in the upper register that starts on the F sharp, the da 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 dum bum da dum, a little slower though, that one. So I focused a lot more on the sharp keys just to help me kind of get that nice singing quality to my upper notes. So so I tried approaching it that way. It was really hard not to do this with like a nice little practice checklist, but I did. And so, and I think but Jen, this is the interesting bit. Maybe it's because I did more of the repeats or something, but even with me just doing like one exercise a day, usually, like but also trying to remember that I can pick and choose as I need it. It still took me about 1 hour for all the different postcards, but even when I interspersed it throughout my practicing, so I would do my scales, then do some etudes, and then if I thought I needed help, I would look and say, oh, so here's this Rabboni etude number 3, so that would be section 2, fingers, would help complement that. I think I settled on number 2. Like even doing that, and I still came out to about an hour for me, like of just the postcards, and it was still quite lengthy, even though I was only doing half the amount, and just like one a day. So that's kind of interesting. So it was a little heftier than I anticipated, but then I also remembered, okay, I can also pike out whatever I want. These are musical postcards, and they're just supposed to be helping. So, so that was my week 1. Lots of double, like going against what I normally do, which is not practicing with the practice little thing to check through my list. So that was my week 1. How was your week 2? So Jen, week 1 you were doing quite a lot, playing through each section, being very diligent, and kind of going like, oh my gosh, this is super long for a warm up. How was your week 2? Was it any better? Did you do anything maybe a little differently?
I did. So actually I kind of hit the same solution that you mentioned, where I decided maybe I just needed to do all the flats or all the sharp keys in one go, because this was taking a very long time and was very, very, as you say, very hefty. So also in the second week I looked at the resource which he'd connected into his preamble, which connects to his website, and notes on each of the exercises.
Whoa.
Really interesting. I had a look and I had a read about each one, and it was really cool because he gave notes on each of these exercises and what specifically he'd been focusing on top of the book. I mean, it's amazing. Like, it's just constant resource after constant resource. Feels very generous. Again, I tried to do one of each section every day, but because I'd split them into either just all sharps or all the flat keys, then that meant it wasn't quite so long. But yeah, I really liked the articulation ones. He was talking about the t and the connector with English language and how our tongue moves. But he was saying, if you're always trying to I really liked his challenge of, if you always keep your tongue hitting the same part of the roof of your mouth, no matter where it is, if it's always the same, the tongue is likely to fatigue more quickly. So if you let the tongue dance, he says, dance around the roof of your mouth, then that's less likely for your tongue to fatigue with single tonguing. So if you move it forwards and backwards a little bit, it kind of can help with the fatigue. So I tried that. It's pretty cool. It does instantly kind of extend your single tonguing life before your tongue starts going blah, 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 and feeling like cotton wool and wood. So I really like that. He's got some really, really cool suggestions. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what I had fun with this second week. But I loved all these notes on each of the exercises and what he was focusing on, because it was fun to play around with some of the ideas he had and ways of approaching it. How was yours? Was it very different from your first week?
It was a little. So I kind of brought back a little practice chart. Because I do like it, but I told myself I could fill it in whenever I wanted. So just so I could kind of keep track of which ones I did. And since we are doing this for a podcast, I did want to try and make sure I touched on all the different exercises as well.
Yeah.
But within this loose structure, so I kind of brought that guy back. And week 2, I also focused a bit on articulation more than I had in the previous week. So in the first week, it was more kind of the breathing and phrasing, a bit with the fingers, but a little bit with the intervals. But for week 3, and I had the Scheherazade excerpts, the more lyrical ones that are included in the excerpt list more often. For week 2, I decided articulation, which, for the flute listeners in there's a beautiful articulation excerpt in Scheherazade for both the flute and the piccolo that appears on numerous audition, in audition packets. And so for non-flute piccolo listeners of our podcast, it's just a very fast excerpt where you have to do double tonguing the whole time, which is this really and it's very high as well, and so it's just non-stop. I think if we wanted to just do to show you maybe how long it goes for. Let's see if I can do this without any notes. See if I can just at the length of it, and much slower as well. But it's basically you have to do that, and it's just super long, and it's very high, which means you have the tongue has to be so crisp, or else it sounds it's very hard. And so I was like, you know what, Paul, you've inspired me. We're gonna do this. I'm gonna get this beast down. I mean, I've done it before. I've actually played it for Paul. Actually, now that I think of it, I did that one for him. I think when we played for him in London. Yeah. So and he was super lovely about it. I'm sure it did not sound the best. But yeah, so I looked a lot at his exercise 1, I think, as well as exercise 3 for articulation for that. Exercise 1 or articulation 1 has a little, it's more just straightforward 16ths or semiquavers for my British and Australian listeners. And there's a bit of, it goes up and down a bit as well. And so I took it up the octave. It's written down the octave. I think at some point he mentions, if you're feeling extra saucy, take it up the octave. So I did that to help prep for it. And I did the flat keys instead of the sharp keys because I did the sharp keys the week before. I think and then I did exercise 3 as well. But the second one is a lot more syncopation, which I've always found super useful when I'm trying to get my fingers as even as possible. I do a lot of, double, and it helps you really find where your fingers are not in line. It does not lie. So that was also super helpful, and I did that a little bit on flute and on piccolo to help kind of prep for that excerpt. And I have to say, it was quite helpful. After that, it was a lot more, It was much easier to stay with the metronome than it has been in the past. So it definitely helped out a whole bunch. So I thought that was really cool. So I did that, and then I also did some Rabboni etudes as well for week 2. And I just really dug into the interval practice. They're just so beautiful. Like, he just writes such a nice melody.
Yeah.
I have to say. So it was very nice. So I really enjoyed the first one. The third one, as we already said, is quite lovely as well. And yeah, I kind of just finished my week kind of going crazy. My tongue was definitely dead because I haven't done as much practice on that Scheherazade excerpt as I have in the past. But yeah, so with a dead tongue, that's how I finished week 2. And but I had a smile on my face because there were some beautiful lyrical passages as well. So that was really cool.
Oh. That's
but yeah, but without giving away too much, I think we might be to verdict territory, Jen.
I think we are.
How did you feel about this sequel full of sequences? Is it going to stay on your stand?
No.
Are certain parts going to stay on your stand? Is it going to land in the trash can or the rubbish bin?
No, it's definitely going to stay on the stand, or at least very close to it, and be pulled out for when I want things. I mean, I think it's going to... I definitely think that those interval exercises are going to be pulled out quite often as like a really nice warm-up. And definitely when I want to get in the zone for playing a little bit of the old Afternoon of the Fawn, I think those breathing and phrasing exercises would be such a good warm-up for it. It does feel... It's very different in style from the 28 days practice. Like the structure, it leaves it way more up to you, and it's very much, as you said, Alex, like you kind of hit a problem with your repertoire, your studies, and you think, okay, what can I go to help work on this? And I think that's when you would go to this book. That being said, I actually really like his finger exercises for scales and thirds.
They really complement the basic scale and third patterns, because those are already, like, for us, you know, at a certain level, at a more professional level, I think they're quite regular. Scales and thirds are kind of, you know, commonplace. We know how to do them. But this just kind of adds that extra level of spice of
it changes it up. So you're not just playing your scales and thirds up and down. So yeah, as you said, it kind of gives it a bit more spice. I like that word. It's a bit spicy. Spicy scales and thirds.
Spicy scales.
So that's quite fun. But yeah, I think that's my verdict. My verdict is I think it's good as a kind of a supplementary exercise book to kind of pull in when you need it. Anyway, what was your verdict, Alex?
So, yes, thank you, Jed. My verdict. So I think, well, I mean, y'all already know how I really appreciate the way Paul approaches all of his writing and all of his exercises. Like, he's just a wealth of information, as you said, Jen. Like, he has so many useful tips and tricks in his introductions, in his notes, everything, on his website, in video form. He's just out there doing everything. It's quite cool. So, and I would say that with these consequence of sequences, it is a definite, like a beautiful pairing to anybody who works through his 28-day warm-ups for every flutist eventually. I think they're definitely going to stay on my stand. I think I already have some of them memorized, especially the breathing ones and the phrasing. They're so lovely to play. And so I think I could see that easily being something that I can incorporate just into my daily practice, especially when I'm not feeling super motivated to practice. If I'm really needing that, like, okay, I'm here, I've showed up, let's trick my brain into doing this. And sometimes when it's like, okay, as great as the Moïse is, they're not always super lyrical. If I wanted to just say, okay, let's do some of these breathing and phrasing exercises, or let's maybe change it up and start with the intervals, because that sounds like I'm playing a movie soundtrack, and my brain will then, my monkey brain will be excited to practice, you know, and then trick it, and eventually, look, I've already practiced an hour. So yeah, I would say that these are probably going to, these will stay on my stand, or definitely my bookshelf, you know, switch them out. And and I would say with regards to who can play these scales, I would say they're definitely aimed more at like intermediate advanced players. So if you're brand new to the flute, maybe not right now, but it's something to aspire to. Like if you can play your regular scales and thirds. and you can do them, and you're feeling comfortable on them, then you're ready for this book. So if you can play scales and thirds, you're set for this book. And this book will help you spice it up a little bit. It takes it from like a regular apple cake recipe, or sorry, they have apple cake here in Germany.
Yeah.
I'll make it a little more standard. It's like, instead of just like a regular apple pie, it's like lavender infused, or sorry, pumpkin infused apple pie, or something that just changes it a little bit and makes it a little more interesting for you. So that's where I'm gonna stay. I would definitely recommend it. Go buy this book. We're not sponsored, by the way.
Go buy this book. Well, thank you for joining us with our first prequel Odyssey. Get ready for a whole season of this, people. I hope you're excited. We certainly are. So if you want to join us with all of these sequels and prequels, you can follow us on all the podcast platforms where you can find the Practice Odyssey. If you happen to know of a platform which we are not on, let us know and we will fix that immediately. And also, if you've tried out any of these books, let us know what you think. Write to us at thepracticeodyssey@gmail.com. And you can also subscribe on YouTube by searching for the Practice Odyssey podcast. Music in this episode is by the amazing Alessandra Woods, and the show art was from Ivan Potter Smith. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now.
Bye.